Welcome to the session, Learn how to use Microsoft Search and integrate your business data. My name is Toni Pohl. I'm an IT consultant at work in Vienna, and I'm specialized in designing solutions for Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Azure. In this session, I want to show you how you can use Microsoft Search from an administrative perspective, how you can configure it, and how you can use it with your own data, how you can adjust your own business data into Microsoft Search. So the reason why I'm doing this session is because I'm searching all the time. I'm searching for data in Microsoft 365 in various locations. And this is also something what McKinsey published in a study that they said more than 20% of work time are spent for searching info. And the thing is, often people don't know where to search. So if I search for data, maybe the data is located in SharePoint, maybe the data is in OneNote, maybe the data is in an email or in a Teams meeting or so. So I simply don't know where to search. So this is what Microsoft tries to address with Microsoft Search. So my agenda for this session is simply two topics. I want to show you how you can use Microsoft Search and how it works and how you can configure it. And the second part is how can you ingest your own data with the so-called graph connectors. To clarify what Microsoft Search is, I've added a slide here showing all the various Microsoft 365 services that show you where you can use it. So of course you can use Microsoft Search in the desktop applications of Office and also in the online versions. You can use Microsoft Search for searching data in your mailbox, like calendar entries and so on, also in Yammer, and more services are about to come. So for example, you can also see the Bing logo here because you can use Microsoft Search when you're using Bing in the browser. So that's also an option that's not so popular in Europe, but it is possible. So again, more services are coming. One important thing I want to point out here is that the data you're searching is a personalized result, which means the data depends on your signals that are sent to Microsoft Graph to your account. And that data is depending on the user and the persons you collaborate with. So this means that if you search for, let's say, an expression, you might get a different result than your colleague who has maybe different topics and different people he's working with. And so the research result is personalized. So that's very important. Of course, Microsoft Search also takes care of security, which means you only find documents and data where you're entitled to see it. So as you're used maybe from SharePoint, you only see documents where you have permissions to see these documents. And the same is true for Microsoft Search. Also, it's a unified endpoint, which means we can use this API later for our own purposes. So where is Microsoft Search? You can use it in Outlook in the web. I've added some menu bars here on this slide just to give you a quick overview. You can use it, of course, in Word, PowerPoint, Outlook, etc., OneDrive. You can use it in Bing, and it will come to more applications sooner or later. We will have a roadmap at the end where we also see a little bit more about that. The important part again here, Microsoft Search is personal and it takes care of your permissions. So let's see how Microsoft Search works. So here I'm logged in a demo tenant and I have a SharePoint site that's called Project Vienna. Let's enter this. And here we have some documents stored, like it's a Teams SharePoint site. So you can see in general, we see some documents about scooters and cars like BMW and Vespa and so on. So of course we can use the search here. So if I search, let's say for Vespa, for example, we will see I only search the document library itself. But of course I can go to the home, to the root site here and say, let's search for Vespa here, for example. And then you see I still search the Project Vienna site, but I can also search for organizations. So let's use a Boolean expression here and say Vespa and let's say scooter. Let's see what we find here. So we get two documents, but I can click on the organizational level here and look if there might be more information about Vespa and scooter in here. And there's one difference you see here. So you can see you also get a static information where I can find more information about Vespa. And that comes from the configuration of Microsoft Search. You also see that you can add a feedback here. Was this answer useful? Was this a search result that made sense for me? And I want to show you how you can configure that. So let's go to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, go to my settings here, and go to Search and Intelligence. Here we see there are various tabs here like insights, answers, etc. So currently I see insights, how is search being used in my demo tenant. There's not much happening here, but you see the time frame, and there have been some search results in Microsoft Search here in the past days. You also see the top result queries here and abandoned queries and so on. And you see the feedback. It will show up sooner or later here if persons are using that feedback. So the important part, what I want to show you, you can configure answers here. And here you can see you have various options like defining acronyms, bookmarks, floor plans, locations, and Q&A. So let's have a look at the acronyms. So for example, you can see there's a list of acronyms like AD, what does it stand for, UID, VET, etc. So for example, I can go also to my mailbox and say, well, what is VET, for example? And I will get a result like VET stands for value added tax and some more information about this acronym. And this comes from this list here. So it's very easy to configure Microsoft Search to use your own explanations of a specific acronym. The same goes here for bookmarks. So you can see there are some bookmarks like Microsoft services, or I've added the homepage of our company here. So for example, I can go here and say, give me the homepage of at work, for example, and it follows the same principle. You see, okay, this is the homepage, and I can click on the link, and to make it very easy for your users to use Microsoft Search and to find relevant results here. The next part here are floor plans. This would require to have AutoCAD files in here you can upload and then search for office rooms or something like this. Locations also follows the same principle. So for example, I have added 2 entries here, like where is the location of at work or ADCD, where is that located? So I can search for ADCD location, for example, and I should find that event here or that entry with a visualization in Bing Maps. So you see it's very easy. You can also use the Q&A here. So for example, what are the current COVID rules? And then you can define that by simply importing it or simply adding a question here, define the question and the answer for that. And then you would see the result of that static information here, COVID rules. And then I find that entry here. So this is really useful and very easy to configure by a global administrator. So let's get back to our slide. Why use Microsoft Search? Well, from a technical perspective, it's easy to use, and it's a unified endpoint for Microsoft data, for data in the Microsoft Cloud. You don't need to set up it. It's automatically available for every Microsoft 365 tenant. We saw it's very easy to use. You have a personal search. You even have a personal history. When you type something in the search box, you can have a list what you have searched for in the past. Microsoft Search also takes care of automatic crawling. You don't have to do anything for the index to being updated. You can integrate other data from other sources, other systems, and you can integrate your custom data. For example, if you want to add your products from your company to Microsoft Search to make it very easy for the user to discover that. This slide here is key information from my perspective. It shows the differences between Microsoft Search and SharePoint Search. So Microsoft Search is also often called the modern search experience, while the SharePoint Search is called classic search. We already saw that Microsoft Search is personal, while the standard search SharePoint Search shows the same results for everyone, but both of the services are using the same index in the background. So if you turn off indexing of a SharePoint site, that site also wouldn't be searchable in Microsoft Search, so keep that in mind. SharePoint Search is available at the publishing, at the classic site types, while the modern search, Microsoft Search, is available only in the modern sites like communication sites. The search experience cannot be customized currently in Microsoft Search, so we will see that a little bit later, while on the SharePoint Search, you can configure the result as you want. But again, this is coming, and you can extend it with your own data. So here's a link also if you're interested in more details. But the basic idea is Microsoft Search is using the same index SharePoint is using. Microsoft offers 4 different types of search technologies within Microsoft 365 and Azure. So the first one is Microsoft Search. It comes automatically. You don't have to license anything or so. You can configure it as we saw. So it's very easy to use, and that's the standard. Then we have SharePoint Syntax. SharePoint Syntax allows you to use machine learning for detecting data in, let's say, an invoice, in a document or so, to work with that data to automatically discover what data is in there. It's trainable, and then you can search for that data as well. So that's a very cool technology. The next part is Viva Topics. Viva Topics allows to or tries to identify what topics are relevant for your organization based on the documents and the data that is stored in Microsoft 365. So you can configure a SharePoint site where you find the results detected by Viva Topics, and you find the topics. For example, I could see all documents containing or that are related with a term like Vespa or BMW or whatever, or scooter, and then see everything that is connected with that to make it easier for the user to find data containing a specific topic or attached to a specific topic. And we have Azure Cognitive Search, and Cognitive Search is a solution for developers. It allows you to use data or to extract data, let's say, from pictures or from documents in another language, to translate it, to extract the data, and to search, to feed that data into an index. And that index can also be searched. And the good part here is that Azure Cognitive Search will be or can be integrated in Microsoft Search as well. Again, it's a solution for developers. It doesn't come out of the box. You have to configure it, you have to develop it, but you can integrate that data as well. How can you use Microsoft Search from outside? Well, there are graph connectors and an API for that, and let me show you that quickly. There are Microsoft built-in connectors, like, for example, connecting to a Azure Blob Storage or so. There are a lot of partner connectors available, like about 100 connectors that allow you to connect data from Confluence or from SAP or other systems, to have them also available in your Microsoft Search experience. And the last part here is the Microsoft Graph API, which allows you to ingest your own data, and we will see that later. One thing I want to show you quickly is how you can use the so-called Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2 Graph connector, because it's very easy to use, and it shows the principle how you can add data to Microsoft Search. So let me show you that quickly here in my tenant. If I go to the admin center, you can see the data sources here. And in the data sources, I can add connectors. So I can click on add here, and then I get a list of various connectors that I can use. You can see I can connect to Oracle, to SQL Server, to Confluence, to Jira. And for example, I can also connect to a blob storage, and that would be the ADLS Gen 2 connector here. Let me show you how that would look like, just to give you a quick overview here. So this is how you would add that connector. You click on add, what we have seen in the demo tenant. You select the provider. In that case, that's that connector here. You give the connector a name here, like marketing. You define, in that case, you need to get the access key to that connection, to that data source. In that case, if it's a blob connector, you would go to the Azure portal, take the connection string from there, and then you would need to add a queue. And the queue is for informing Microsoft Search that some data has changed. So we need to add a queue here. Once the queue is created, we can use that data here in the connection settings to say, okay, this is the access to my blob storage, and this is the name of the queue. We can test it. The connection hopefully is successful. And then I need to map the labels to say which data is where. So if I have a file storage, for example, that file would have a file name, a data, maybe a title, and so on. And I can now map which properties are relevant to me and which properties can be queried. So I can simply select, okay, I want to query for that data. And you can see Is it also refinable? Is it searchable? This field, like the file name would make sense, maybe the owner of that file, but maybe the file size wouldn't make sense to search for a number or something like this. So you can configure that. You can also say who gets access to that data source. So I could say everyone in the organization gets that data, or if I want to restrict it, I would add the ID of a group here in the so-called access control list and say only members of this group are allowed to search for that data. Then we can define a refresh setting. How often shall the result be refreshed? We can review the connection and then we are done. And once you have done that, you get that connector in here. So let's have a look at our demo tenant. Go back here to my data sources. I have already configured such a connector here in contracts, and you can see the last sync time was 6 minutes ago. There are currently 23 items indexed. It's visible to everyone, and this would be the limit of the number of documents I can upload there. So it's very easy to use, and this is just to show you how you can configure such a connector. Just some things I want to add here. If you're using the connectors might have limits, like that connector, for example, has a file size limit of 4 megabytes. It only supports these file types here. If you're interested in more details here, simply follow that link. But again, check out what the connector supports. If you say, well, I have a blob storage that has thousands of documents and I don't need them on a daily basis, maybe that's an archive or something like this data that is more than 10 years old, but I want to be able to search for that data, a blob connector could make sense. If you say, well, I need these documents on a daily basis, or the files are larger than 4 megabytes, I would simply upload them. But you see the idea that these connectors support a specific use case, and it depends on the use case if it makes sense to add that data to Microsoft Search or not. Another thing, when working with the Microsoft Graph connectors, there are some API limits here. So we saw that the maximum limit per connection, for example, is 700,000 items currently. So this will change in the future. We can also define maximum 10 connections per tenant. And there are some throttling topics here as well as with every API. So the next part, I want to show you how you can use that API for ingesting your own data with PowerShell. In this sample, I want to ingest data into Microsoft 365, and I want to create a new connector. So how can I do that? Well, the first part, I need to authenticate against Microsoft Graph. So I have a script for that. It's called getToken. And as you can see, it requires a tenant ID, an app ID, and a secret to authenticate against Graph so that I'm able to run my operations. So where do I get this data from? Let me show you that. I simply go to my tenant here and go to Azure Active Directory. So I'm here in the Azure portal. I go to my Azure Active Directory here, and I go to app registration. You can see there's already one application I created, so I can create a new one. I simply call this Search Demo, for example. And I say everyone in my organization can use this application, register that. I get the application ID, so I copy that. And let's go to my script here and say that's my app ID here. And the second part, I use the tenant ID, which is this one, F8 something. And this is already existing, so I already have that. It's this one. And then I need a secret. So I need to generate a secret for this application to be able, that's my password to access that. So let's go to my browser here, create such a secret here for this application. So I simply click New Client Secret, give it a name like secret, for example, and say, well, this is valid for 6 months, for example, and I simply create that. Once I've created that, I can simply copy that secret ID, that value here, which is AZ something, and I simply paste it in my secrets. Perfect. There's one thing I need to add more, I need to say which permissions does this application get. And if I want to work with Microsoft Search, I need, besides the permission to log in, I need to add permissions. In that case, it's a resource provider graph. So I simply select that. And I say, I don't want to log in interactively. In this case, I want to use a script, an application. So I select the application permissions and I search for external. And I get two permission sets, and one is the external item. So I want to be able to read and write items, and I also want to maybe say who is where is this information owned by, and I want to work with the connectors. So I also need the permission to write connection information or connectors informations, and I also select this one. So I add these 4 permissions here, and you can see I now need to grant these permissions so that I say as an administrator, I trust this application here. Okay, perfect. So now my application here has the required permissions to log in and to work with data with the external connectors. So let's try it out. Let's go to my script here. You can see here's the information which I just generated. And then I have a function that says, I want to log in. I need to get a token from that endpoint here, loginmicrosoft.com. I say, these are my data. I want to use the login flow for client credentials, which is an application passing a app ID and a secret. So I add this data here, like the app ID, the key, and the resource URL. I do a post against that endpoint, and then I get back a result. And that result is simply written into a variable here, script API header. And because I need that data for my future requests, I simply store it here so that I can use it as a bureau token and add it to my request. So let's run this application. I also do an output to a file here. Just I want to show you how you can encode that here. And you can see it worked. So my new application is generated. I got a bureau. Let's have a look at the bureau because I write it to a token here as well. So let's look at token. So this is the token here. And if you're interested what's in the token, I simply go back to my browser here and open jot.ms to analyze that token here. So I simply paste that. Please don't do this with production tokens. It's just here for demo purposes so that you get an idea what's in the token. You can see the type of the token is jot. It has a validation date like this here. If I would decode that, that would be valid for 1 hour. And that's my search demo application with this app ID. This is the token provider. In that case, the security token service from Microsoft. And here you can see these are the permissions I added to this application here. And then you see some more data like the region and so on. So this is what's stored in the token. And with that token, we can continue to work. Okay, let's go back to our scripts here. What can we do? First of all, we want to know what connections are already existing in the tenant. Here you can see I do a GET request against that endpoint here, and this is the header, the token I pass here. So let's have a look what kind of connections we already have. And you can see we get a list back like workshops, trainings, cloud contracts, parts. Let's compare that with our browser here. Go back to this Microsoft Admin Center. And this is exactly what we see here, workshop, trainings, cloud contracts, parts. You see you have full access by using the graph to the search and intelligence backend to the data that's stored in here. And we also see the status, like, for example, the connection status. Are these connections ready to use? So in that case, I see, okay, they are all ready. I can use them, or they are used by Microsoft Search. So the next part I want to do, I want to create a new connector. So we can do that easily. So for example, we can create a connector that's called sessions here. And then I need to pass a body and I say a post request with that header and that body. So let's run this here. And this should work relatively quickly. And I get data back. So I've now created a new connector with the name of sessions. If I run the get connectors again, we would see that this connector is also in that list. And you can see the state of that connector is in draft mode. We are not really done yet. We have created a connector, but we need to add a little bit more information. The more information is the so-called schema. So what data do I want to ingest into that connector? I need to describe what values are added here. When we go back to our trainings, we see we have an ID, we have a start date of that session, we have a type, an audience, a title, a speaker in the room. So I need to pass that information to the connector. So let's go to our register schema here. And this is what I'm doing here. I say there's an ID of type string, there's a title of the session of type string, there's a date of the date time, a speaker, a room, and the audience, and the type. And then I simply ingest that data into that connector, which is currently sessions. So I haven't changed the variable here. So I could simply run this application here, this small script here. So let's try it out. In my case, I have a schema for the same schema for trainings. So let me show you how this works when you want to ingest data. So I say the connector here is not my sessions, but trainings that's already existing and ready to use. This is important because here you can define who has access to that data, to that item I'm currently ingesting. So in my case, I'd say everyone in the organization, that would be that hard-coded value of that everyone group, but I could use a group ID of another group and say only members of that group are allowed to see what I'm currently ingesting here. And this is what we ingest here. That's the ID, the title, the speaker room, and so on. So in my case, that's hard-coded. How do I do that? With a put method against that connector with the item ID. The item ID is here 1111, for example. So simply run this here. In that case, I'm done. So that item should be ingested into the trainings connector. So in that case, the title is using extended search, for example. So let's have a look into our portal. So let's go to the browser here. I've ingested that one into trainings. So let's see, I can refresh the data here. You can see there are currently 180 items available here in that connector here. And it should also change the update time. The last sync time you see it's saying now, just now. Let's try it out. We can simply go to our search here, and you can see I've added a so-called vertical, a tab that's called trainings. So let's search for that type what I copied using extended search, and you can see I get result with that ID which I just ingested. So how does the connection work with between the data and the visualization? You can do that easily here in the configuration here. So we see we have the data connector. In that case, that's sessions or training. So let's use the sessions maybe, which are still in draft here. I can go to customizations and I need to do two things. I need to add a vertical here. That's that tab. So you can see here's a list of the tabs, what we saw before here, all files, sites, people, and so on, and it ends with contracts. So which is this one, I can add another tab and say, well, this tab is called sessions. So let's add this here. And now I can select, is it a SharePoint search or a connector? In my case, it's a connector. And I'm using the data from the sessions data source. I could also select more than one, which is also very useful in some parts. Then I can specify, I want to not get a list of all the items in that data source. I want to filter it with a custom query language. In my case, I simply skip that. I say I want to have all items in here. Then I can add additional filters here. I also skip that. I say I want to have every data that's in the data source, and that's it. And the last part is I need to add a so-called, I need to enable that vertical here. So enable that one, it's called sessions, and now I'm done. So the list now includes my sessions. Perfect. The second part I need to do, I need to tell Microsoft Search how that custom search shall look like. So I need to define the so-called result type. And the result type is here. So I can go to the result type. I can add another one and say my result type is sessions. After giving it a name, I need to say, what's the content source for that? Well, it's the content source. It's called session here as well. That's my data source. So I've added training data there. Then I can say also define some rules to filter that a little bit. And this is the important part. I need to define how the output shall look like. And I can do that with a so-called launch layout designer. So I can do that. You come to this page here, and then you can see some suggestions here, which say, well, how shall the result look like? Do you want to have it with picture or without picture, and so on? So I can simply say, well, I don't have pictures here, but maybe I want to use this one, or, well, I have a picture for every training, for every session here. Let's use this one. So I simply select that, say get started, and now I'm in the search layout designer here. And here you can see I have a title, I have a subtitle, I have a text, and I have that graphic here. So I can click on edit layout here and can see at the layout editor how this looks like. So I could go here and say, I want to change some of these properties here. So for example, I can say this shall be medium or larger. So, and then the visualization changes. The thing what I want to point out here, I simply can use this here and copy and paste it into my layout designer field here, because this is what I need to add here, the so-called JSON script, which describes how the data shall look like. I have prepared it here in my scripts as well. So for example, for the trainings, this is how my result would look like. So I can simply use this here and say that's a so-called adaptive card here. That's a JSON description. Here I have an icon. That icon comes from a blob storage with the size of medium. Then I have a text block. Here I add the title of that and I add a link to that and so on. So I can simply use this one here instead of the one which I just created. So I simply delete that, add that here, click next, and more or less I'm done. Now I can add that custom result type to my results. Okay, this is what you need to do to be able to visualize that data. So if I go now to the project Vienna, let's refresh that page. Let's see if it's already existing here. Sometimes it takes a while. So in the next minutes, we would see that the sessions will be shown here. And this is how this would look like. Remember, we have ingested data into the trainings data source, not into the sessions. That's currently empty. Let's see if it's still already existing here. If I go back to my data sources, now it says it's ready as far as I've seen. Yeah, now we could ingest data into that connector here as well. So let me try this quickly just to show you that. Let's go to ingest data, change that to the connector sessions, and run this again. So I'm ingesting the same data into my sessions connector with ID 1111. Let's go back to my browser here, and we should see sooner or later when we click on that if we refresh it, there should be one item indexed in the next minute or so. And this is what I mentioned at the beginning. You don't have any influence in the indexing itself. It will be triggered if you change the data of the data source automatically. But this usually happens in the next minute or depending on the size of the data, of course. Okay, so with that, you have a tool set where you can work with that data. For example, if you want to get a specific item, let's say I want to get the item 1111 in the trainings connector, let's try it out. We should get back a result, what we have ingested in here. So that would be the method to get that data programmatically. And of course, you can also delete an item with a delete method you can call. And of course, you can also delete the full connector. For example, if I say I want to remove that sessions, I could do that here as well. So it's easy to use with the Graph REST endpoint to work with custom data, to create connectors, to work with these connectors which are here. So let's check again. It's still working, obviously. So this one item should show up here in the next minutes, and the same goes here for the tabs for the vertical I defined. It should also show up here in the next minute. So be patient with that. It takes some minutes. There's also a sample on GitHub that shows how you can use C# with the Graph SDK to create your own applications using Microsoft Search. So you can download it and try it out with this URL. And I just want to quickly show you how you can do that, how you can work with that. So the first part, there comes a database, a SQLite database that includes auto parts here. And you can see there are some door hinges and seats and so on. And this is the data that shall be ingested. When you run this application, you can first create a new connection. You give that connection a name, like parts, for example. Then we do the same what we did in PowerShell before. We create a new connection. Once this connection is created, you can simply select it here. And once it's selected, you need to register a schema. So in that case, it's containing these columns, which we saw in the SQL database. And once this schema is created, I used this method here, like 7 push updated items to current connections. And you can see all the items are updated or ingested into that connector, into that data source. So it's the same principle what we saw before. Once this is done, you will see that the connector is updated. In that case, it has, for example, 15 items here, and you can search for that data quickly. For example, if you want to change data, you could also, of course, do something like ingest, insert new items here, like a pink car, a green car, for example, add that to the database, write that data back to the database, and run this application again and say, okay, select the connector, and then push the updated items. And you should see that here. Let me show you the result here in real life here. Let's go to my parts here and search for car, for example. And you can see this is the vertical parts. This is the result type, which has been created for that application here, for that data source. And this is how this data is presented. We can see everything that includes car here, like pink car, green car, blue car, etc., is listed here. So that's also a very nice demo. And if you're interested in working with that, check it out and try it out. And there's some more I want to show you, which is the PnP search solution. So if you're an admin and you say, well, I want to configure a SharePoint site using Microsoft Search, there's a ready-to-use solution you can use that's brand new, currently in version 4. And you can go to this URL, AKMS PnP search, or here's the GitHub repository URL below that, and you can try it out to configure it without any developing. So let me show you how this looks like. And here I have created a new page and added the solution, the web parts from that solution. So if I go to edit page here, you can see there is a web part that's called PnP search box. That would be the search expression. Then there's a web part like filter vertical, for example, search verticals. And then there's a result type, a search results web part. And we can simply configure that here by editing these web parts. So I've added them to the website. And for the web part, for example, I said use Microsoft Search. Then you can see there are a lot of configurations you can change here. How shall the result be presented, as a list or a card or a slider or so? That's really neat. Do I want to use the Microsoft Graph Toolkit? And the relevant part is we connect that result here to that PnP search box here and to the expression that's in here in that text box. So that's more or less what you need to do here. So let's go to my republish of my page here, and let's try to search for Vespa, for example, with Microsoft Search. And we should see in that case, we get a result with Vespa documents in that layout, what we decided for this search vertical or for this search result here. So that's really nice. And if you want to try it out, I really recommend to go to that URL here, because there's also an installation description here that says how can you configure it, and some tutorials which show you how you can create a simple search page, how you can set up managed properties, and so on. So that's really cool. A ready-to-use web part that comes for free, you can simply use in your SharePoint sites. So here's my search summary. I wanted to show you how you can work with Microsoft Search. You can see it's easy to configure it. It comes automatically with Microsoft 365. You don't need to have an extra license or so. It currently does not allow to search for content that's stored in pictures, but you could combine it with Microsoft, with Azure Cognitive Search, for example. You can configure your own connector. So we have seen how to customize your own data connections and how to customize the results and the verticals and all that stuff. So it comes in a package that's easy to consume for administrators as well as for developers. Important is this roadmap here. That's from, I think, from December 2021. And there are two things I want to point out. First of all, the Azure Cognitive Search results will be or can be included in Microsoft Search. And also there will come a semantic search, which means if you search for Vespa, you will also find for example, Scooter and Lambretta and other vendors. So this is also useful to search not only for one specific word, but for the meaning of a word. So these are very cool features that are coming to search. And there's one more thing I want to show you, which is this URL here. So let's open that. This URL leads to the Microsoft 365 roadmap, and it's filtered here for Microsoft Search. And you can see what the team is currently working on. And some of these features have already a date for GA. So for example, some things happened here in December. So for example, add custom filters and custom verticals is a feature that's already available because it's available since January, or other things that are maybe prepared or maybe just for a closed audience. So you see, this is also really useful to see what they are currently doing and what they're expecting to add to Microsoft Search. So I really like this roadmap here, and I want to encourage you to check that out as well if you're working with Microsoft Search. I have added some Microsoft Search resources here as well, so you can find my PowerShell scripts at my GitHub repository. You can see the roadmap here as well. You can try out the GitHub sample for the web parts, the modern search web parts, what was the C# application, which I quickly stepped through. And you can see a lot more about the various search topics here with these links here. I hope this information was useful. I hope you try it out immediately. If you want to contact me, here you can see my contact data. Check out my GitHub repository. And I wish you a lot of fun at the other sessions at the Austrian Developer Community Day. Thank you.